agenda is first I'll talk about some general ideas about getting research started, and then I'll present an overview of the databases we have in Michigan. And here it will be very important to have the recording, and also if people wish, I can send out the slides as well, because a lot of that data you might want to consult later. And then I'll try to add some thoughts about how to do research that's innovative when the data has already been collected, which is our situation. It's not the same situation as when you completely initiate something. And then I'd really like to hear the thoughts of the assembled. So getting your research started, I think there's this important concept that I try to emphasize always. You have to find your research niche. Where exactly does your research fit? It's not enough to have an idea. It has to fit somewhere. And in order to get funding, you really have to convince reviewers that you have identified something very specific. And you do that basically by first identifying a really important scientific health problem that has yet to be solved. That it always begins with a problem. And the next step then is to be sure that you're familiar with what's already been done in the area, because you're going to have to distinguish yourself from what's already been done. And then that what you have to offer is an improvement, and that if you make this improvement, there will be an impact either on science or on public health or on both, ideally. And here's an outline I make of these first steps. And I divide this into a few separate items. I think the first thing I think is what I call browsing. I'll elaborate on each of these, followed by a more directed critical reading. And then this process of absorbing what you've read and trying to interact with what you've read, using the literature to further test your ideas. And then a process of refining your ideas through discussion with mentors, with friends, with colleagues, with people from other fields often, ultimately to get down to this testable hypothesis at the end. So let me talk about browsing. And I think this is sometimes ignored, but I think it's very important. What I think of it as really semi-directed reading. It's really reading without a special focus, allowing your mind to wander, identifying the papers, the ideas that seem intriguing to you, following them in different directions. Other papers by the same research team, papers that have cited the papers that interest you, papers on different topics, but use same core ideas or methodology. And this process, I think this undirected process is what allows you to identify things that you might not have thought of before. And of course, I mentioned what you can use in terms of expanding what you've seen. Web of Science cited reference search is very useful to see what's been done in the same field since that paper that you really liked has been published. This is the MSU link to the Web of Science cited reference search. You can see any paper who's cited it more recently. And also, it helps to go beyond PubMed by looking at NIH Reporter, that's the website, to see what has been funded in this area, what research is ongoing that might not have been published yet. And here's another resource that is always important, I think, descriptive epidemiology, really simply what is known of the distribution of a condition that you're interested in populations. Because if you know that, you know quite a bit already. If you know who's at higher risk of the condition, that helps you to formulate a hypothesis. I'll give you some examples. Why is breast cancer 3 times commoner in the US than Japan? Does that suggest any hypotheses? Why do African Americans have twice the prematurity rate of US whites? Why has prostate cancer been halved in the past 30 years? What's been going on? Childhood leukemia has an upward social class gradient. People of higher, more affluent children have higher risks of childhood leukemia, especially lymphocytic. Now, your hypothesis may not explain these differences, but it has to be consistent with them. And it also tells you what you might have to control for in your analysis when you're going beyond these obvious differences. Now, once you've browsed and you've kind of gotten yourself into a little corner of thought, the reading becomes much more directed. You're looking for something. You may be looking for a replication of a key paper. You may be looking for another use of the same approach to see if it really works. You may be looking for something that contradicts a paper you thought was very interesting or important. So it's much more focused, the next step. And I think when you're reading, you always take a skeptical attitude. You don't assume anything is given. You take the position the authors have to prove to you their points. And most importantly, you have to question the assumptions whenever you can, because it's the questioning of assumptions that allows you to find out what the field needs to advance. We often get stuck in ruts of thought that we have a hard time escaping from. And you have to try to avoid that if you can, if you're going to be doing something new and innovative. And the ultimate goal is to find out where that lack is, what hasn't been done yet. Perhaps it's been done, but not in a large enough sample. Perhaps there should be a trial and it's not been done. Perhaps there are better measures of exposure outcome. Perhaps people haven't considered bias or confounding enough. Maybe the whole concept is wrong. Maybe we have to move into a different idea. So that's what you're trying to find, that lack, which becomes your niche. Your niche is to attack that lack, what's not there. And especially look for uncertainty, because uncertainty is what all important research addresses. Because if you're certain you know the answer, leave this meeting. We don't need you. You have to be uncertain, because certainty, frankly, is the enemy of research. You have nothing to ask. You can uncover the uncertain value of treatments, uncertain causes of disease, uncertain diagnostic process, uncertain impacts. All of these uncertainties are food for research. And then you have to do a lot of hard thinking. And I always think thinking is the hardest and most neglected component of research. So you have to really think that, are you really addressing an important need? Do you really have a good solution? And by the way, do you have enough commitment to see this through? I have to tell you, approaching NIH study sections with grants is not for the faint of heart. They will beat you up many more times than they will laud you. So you have to really be persistent and can you write a good enough grant? And I think probably all of you can. You may not feel it right at the moment, but eventually I suspect you all can. So the merging of reading and thinking is when you read articles, you have to extract those contentious or uncertain issues which raise important research questions and weigh how important they are. Is it really important to address? Maybe the difference is not that it's trivial. And then whether you might be in a good position to address them, and especially whether you have enough interest to devote energy to the task. Because truly, I believe that your passion for a topic is what ultimately drives good research proposals. You have to be a little bit crazily passionate about the idea, just a little bit, not too much, but enough to move the ball forward. Now, when you're a young person, you might be inclined to say, well, what can I offer? This has already been plowed through by many good people. What can I do that's better? But you have to understand that new ideas usually come from people who are new to the field because they question the standard assumptions. This is putting fresh eyes on a topic that is extremely valuable. And even if you are new and young to the topic and say, I don't know much about this, but I'm intrigued by it. When you set your eyes upon it, you're setting fresh eyes on it, and that's always useful. And you may come up with something that other people who are so immersed in the field that they can't see. All right, this is a little bit of my giving you a little bit of philosophy that, of course, everybody has to modify to their own taste. So let me talk a little bit now about our CHARM databases, and I'm going to give a lot of information here. So just keep it. I don't expect it to be fully absorbed, and it may be in some places incomplete or not quite ready for prime time, but take from it what you can, and we'll keep these slides and the tape available for people to use. So first of all, what does the term CHARM mean? CHARM is Child Health Advances from Research with Mothers, a term developed by the master of all acronyms, our own Gene Curver, who recognized that the whole central theme of our research is that things happen very early in life, in pregnancy, in the early period of time of life, of newborn life, that influence later child health, later maternal health as well. And so CHARM is us. CHARM is the we people who are doing what we are trying to do. It's an umbrella for all of us to be under. The reason we are moving, I'll tell you about all the cohorts we have. The reason, this is the central point. The central point is that our new ECHO funding, which began in September, cannot be used for the analyses of local data. In the first wave, the first 7 years, we were able to analyze our own local data, put out our own papers. We're not allowed to do it with ECHO funds. We can do this with other funds. And those of us who are not 100% on ECHO, of course, can play with the data, but not under the umbrella of the ECHO funding. So we have some people who are funded by ECHO and a little bit funded by local sources so they can do local work. And that's why this whole set of meetings is going on, so that we can take advantage of the intelligence of this great group of investigators to see what can we do with our local data alone. And I will now describe what our local data are. So we began with the ARCH cohort. We call it the Archive for Research in Child Health. We began recruiting pregnancies in 2008 in Lansing, Michigan. And we did that until 2016. And that was very useful that we did that, because when the ECHO announcement came out, it said you have to have an existing cohort, either a pregnancy or a birth cohort. And we had that in ARCH. And then, because we saw that ECHO was on the horizon, and we had the idea that we would expand, as required by the ECHO announcement, our cohort by making it all Michigan. So we thought we'd better do more than Lansing recruitment. So we recruited 130 pregnancies from Detroit, Grand Rapids, and Traverse City. We got help from the Michigan Health Endowment Fund in this effort. So the total pregnancies we call ARCH is the number is 984. Now we got about a little more than 50% of these to be, we were able to successfully recontact them after many years, and they agreed to, and get them to agree to sign to participate in the national study, and those are being followed. The other 400, we have a lot of information on, but they're not being followed actively. We have pregnancy data on them. We have a lot of early follow-up data on them, but they're not part of the overall effort that is funded by ECHO. Then with when ECHO came in 2017, we decided what we submitted to ECHO was that we will expand our local Lansing cohort, now using many of the same ideas of that cohort, to a statewide cohort. And by a complicated sampling scheme that maybe Mike Elliott can tell us about. Mike, are you on this call? I don't know if Mike is. If he,
I am.
So we can ask you if there are questions how you did the sampling. But basically, we wound up sampling 10 hospitals and by a second stage, 20 prenatal clinics. These are stratified random samples of the Lower Peninsula, which is 97% of births in Michigan, to get a sample of 1,000 pregnancies enrolled in 10 hospitals and in 20 prenatal clinics. And because of the water contamination of Flint did not fit into that sampling frame of 10 hospitals. Hurley didn't. We added Hurley and its prenatal clinic, aiming for about 1,100. Our final total pregnancies recruited is 1,132.
Okay, calling us.
Carolyn, you may have to mute. So the next phase of ECHO, which we just got funded for in September, we plan to enroll some 500 new pregnancies in Detroit, Flint, and Traverse City, because we focus on adding diversity. That's the African American participants, rural poverty participants to the ECHO program. And for these participants, we'll have access to the data we collect, but not to the specimens we shipped to the biostorage center at Vanderbilt. They will be ECHO-wide, participate in ECHO-wide studies. And we will have to administer the ECHO-wide protocol. So in phase one, some of the questions we asked were our own. But here we're going to be only able to ask our own protocol questions. So to sum it up, we are now following nearly 1,700 children from ARCH and March, 550 from ARCH, more than 1,000 from ARCH, and we'll eventually be following over 2,000 children from well-characterized pregnancies when all is said and done. So here are the number of participants for whom we have at least one data item. Now, a lot of these items that I will show you are not collected on every single person because an item may have been brought in late, like the COVID questions we asked, they only came in 2020 or 2021, or some of the revisions of the ECHO protocol, which brought in new questions. But we have in pregnancy, we have at least 1,103 pregnancies that gave us at least one data item. We have 2 infant visits, 3 months and 9 months, and these are the numbers of visit numbers that we have at least one item of data on. And as you see, March, we start with a large number and it gets fewer and fewer because a lot of our kids haven't reached. We have very few, we have hardly any 5-year-olds in March yet. On the other hand, Arch is an older cohort, so we have data. We're now collecting data on them as well, and we have this number of data points at different years. Of course, when we came in with the Arch protocol, some of the with the ECHO protocol, some of the Arch kids were 6, 7, 8, 9, so we don't get the same total. Collect once items that you collect without a fixed time period. We have 500 in Arch and another 600 in the children of March. So that gives you a sense of how large the database is. And as I say, we have additional pre-ECHO Arch data that are much less extensive than the March protocol, but still there is information there. And this is just obviously a broad outline, and obviously you'll have to learn more if you get into the data. Now, biological specimens were collected in both March and Arch. Both enrolled at first prenatal visit, both cohorts. The new recruitment in ECHO 2 will be a little more restrictive because they insist that we only enroll with first visits that occur before 20 weeks, which is probably 80 to 90% of first visits, but some would argue that the women who come in later are sometimes the most important women to study. But anyway, we enrolled it at first visit whenever it took place. Our plan was to archive extra blood from the standard collections that are taken in prenatal care. The first at the onset of prenatal care, which is usually when a woman comes in, end of the first, beginning of the second trimester, and at the routine glucose tolerance test, which is somewhere around 28, 30 weeks with a range of time. We tried to collect urine in each trimester, and we also requested to obtain any leftover infant blood from the newborn genetic screening work, which we have, which I'll show you in a moment, we've been successful in accessing. March collected whole placentas and as well as several additional biological items on mother and child that were added rather later to the ECHO protocol, and that covered some March and some Arch children, as I'll show you in the next slide. So here are all the biological, this is the number I've been able to obtain thanks to Caitlin Watson, fabulous new data analyst, manager. I was able to obtain the total number of biological specimens we have in these 2 cohorts. I won't go over them in any detail. Obviously, our largest number are prenatal bloods, prenatal urines. As you can see, we have in some places thousands of such specimens. Newborn bloods, we have a lot on Arch. And in March, we have actually in hand a smallish number, but we have requested, because you have to pay for the spots from the health department. It costs $50 at least a shot to get one spot. So we only request them when we need them for studies, but we have permission from 1,500 women to get a newborn blood spot. In the next phase of ECHO, there will not be a request for newborn blood spots. That's not part of the ECHO new protocol, although it's really one of the most valuable pieces of information you can get. Later in the protocol, later in the ECHO world, we got requests to do maternal hair, child hair, toenails, saliva, teeth, and as you see the numbers there, we have probably most successful in being the tooth fairy to many little kids between 5 and 10, and only in the Arch cohort. The March cohort is not old enough yet. So we have these items, and as you contemplate what you might do, you can always go back to this slide and say, how many how many prenatal urines do we have to measure? And do we have some in the first trimester? And so on and so forth. Now, this is the kind of data we get. I'm trying to give you a very global look at what kinds of things. These are not the specific items.
Nigel, as you're going through, can you break it down as sex specificity of the offspring? Male fetus versus female?
That can be done. That can be done in something. Yeah, we have sex. We do record that on both parent and child. Okay, we have that data. So we get diet and nutrition data, physical activity, medical history, a lot of good data that our public policy oriented people will be very interested in on the use of Michigan Health Services, planned and actual. We worked closely with our collaborators in the health department to make sure we were asking questions relevant to public policy in Michigan. We know who is planning to take advantage of a health service for the state offers, who actually used it in the second trimester. The third trimester survey that are listed here are things that ECHO added, and we had to add another interview to capture when we didn't have it before. That's why the third trimester is rather a smaller sample size than first and second, which was part of our original communications. And you can look, I won't go over everything, but you can look and see, oh, if you're interested in secondhand smoke, sleep quality, we have rather good data. In fact, sleep is particularly strong data that we have. In the babies, we have questions for the mother and questions about the child. And you can see the topics there. A lot of sleep and nutrition stuff in the babies, a little bit on airways, something about pets in the home. Always a lot of emphasis in ECHO on the mother's psychological state, depression scales, emotional support, those kinds of things, income assistance, and her health in general. And I should just point out, okay, page up. Just want to say that ages and stages at 9 months is the first kind of developmental cognitive, semi-cognitive test we have on the babies. Somebody needs to mute, I'm afraid. Somebody needs to mute. Now, again, then we do age 2, 3, and 4. We have annual visits. They are not in person until age 4. But at all visits, we address updates for geocoding purposes. We have a COVID-19 survey now. And other things are obtained at different times, as you can see here on the mother. We do get at age 4, we get anthropometrics on the mother. We weigh and measure her. That's the first in-person visit. And for children in those ages, again, a lot of emphasis on food and nutrition, sleep, household chemical. We get something on cognitive skills, not the same instrument, obviously. We get something on language at age 2. As I mentioned, we had ages and stages at 9 months. Cognitive skills, I think age 3 is also ages and stages. 4 is an age toolbox. So we get more and more sophisticated in our assessment of cognition. We always get medical history updates, vaccination status, and so forth. By the way, we do link to MICR, the Michigan immunization registry, so we can know exactly what people got as well as what people thought about vaccination. We have a subcontract. We have an NIH grant which has a subcontract from John Zellner at U of M to study vaccination information in our cohort, attitudes and uptake and so forth. The older kids are all in Arch. March doesn't have older kids yet, and these are some of the things we get. We get on mothers, we get ACEs that she had in childhood. That's actually that ACEs is about the mother's own ACEs. We start to get academic competencies, stuff about school, food and nutrition. Again, the kinds of things you might expect. I'm just giving you these rather broad looks at things. To get more detailed, and here's some of the older kids we have at 8 and 9. We're starting to run out of kids above 9. We also have things that are not tagged to a specific age, but somewhere you have to ask them, like, for example, the maternal discrimination scale, how much discrimination she feels she's experienced, demographics, chemical and smoke exposure. We tend to get that at some point in childhood. So as you can see, it's a very, very global database, lots of stuff. And when you want to make use of them, the first thing you need to do, once you've formulated a hypothesis, and you want to really look closely at our March Arch data, much beyond what I just gave you here, look at the specific instruments. I just want you to know all our data dictionaries are publicly available and can be found on this website, the CHARM website. Just go to CHARM Study and look for researchers. And it also, the site provides information on how to access our data. Believe it or not, we're very eager to have everybody use the data. But we're not exactly going to just say, here, take my data, please. Rather, you have to go make a specific request. You have to have an idea, suggest why you need it, what exactly you need, when you need it. That's not trivial if you're preparing a grant proposal. And also, if you do work with the data and create a new variable, it comes back to us. Everything you have recreated, any result should be returned to us as well as published. Now, just final thoughts briefly on getting creative with existing data. Now, doing research with an existing data set is not quite the same as deciding on the data you'd like to collect or the experiment you would like to conduct. And I really would try to discourage you from trying to fit a hypothesis to data. Rather, try to find data that fits your hypothesis. Now, the data you'll find in March or Arch will probably not fit the hypothesis perfectly, but maybe with some modification, you can make use of the available data. But it's not an exercise, I think, when you have a big database saying, what can I squeeze out of this database? It's rather, I have this idea. There's probably something in March that's relevant to it. Let me see exactly where it could fit. I think that's the process I think that's most advisable. And our major goal, of course, is to ultimately produce important papers and papers that can lead to changes in public policy or clinical policy. But you could use the data to develop an echo-wide study, to begin with what we have here and then propose it to the entire ECHO cohort, people who have collected the same or similar data. We're not the only, although we are a very large cohort for placentas, in terms of the total number of placentas that we have are 800 placentas, most of which are with Carolyn Salafi, who's on the call at Placental Analytics. Some are currently with Fisher. There are other cohorts that collect placentas, and someone interested in the placenta will obviously say to themselves, oh, wow, let's go talk to Rich Miller at Rochester or other people who have collected placentas in their cohorts. So there are others, and you can learn from the ECHO website, probably national website, who has what. You can call people, and then that would be very productive from the point of view of this second wave of ECHO, where ECHO-wide studies are being encouraguraged. Maybe you use the data to generate another proposal that builds on ECHO, but is not itself. It's not, the purpose is not to do a paper, but maybe to propose a new study or perhaps a trial of something. So there are lots of ways you can use ECHO data. Perhaps if you start to say, wow, this is a lot to do, I can't do this all by myself, consider that we have interest groups and you are free to create more. We have an environmental chemicals interest group, a microbiome interest group. The microbiome interest group, by the way, Sarah Comstock has brought up to the ECHO-wide level. So it's not just us, it's also ECHO-wide. And I think Sarah is co-chair of that. Nutrition, Jean is leading a group of people interested in nutritional issues. Health policy is now represented by Gail Shipp, our faculty member, formerly a fellow, got a supplement, which was a supplement to our main ECHO study that allowed her to do a fellowship with us. And she's now a faculty member in our Flint public health program. And we just met yesterday, actually. Jennifer Strawn and Henry Ford is leading our efforts to analyze our placental databases. So you don't have to be alone. And if you want to create another interest group, by all means, let's talk about it. So there's also the possibility of adding new variables. We have at least 2 NIH-funded studies that make use of our March cohorts by adding new data collection, including one study by Sarah Comstock, NIH-funded, is collecting more extensive microbiome data. A study by Rebecca Nickmeyer of MSU is adding neuroimaging to a subset of our babies. Now, those studies they can be proposed, but these really have to be very carefully considered because we don't want to add burdens to our participants and interfere with our own data collections because of another data collection. But if we do it in a coordinated fashion, it's entirely feasible. And again, all of that data, I think, belongs ultimately in that whole charm collectivity, should be returned to us.